think the people would allow it to displace that many people again.
6,500 people were in the way of progress. That's what Hydro called it. They called it progress.
It was so senseless. I cannot imagine this ever happening again.
Many of the elderly people seemed to pass away shortly after this. And it was probably from their broken hearts.
Sometimes in the autumn, when the water is low, I can walk right out to where Oakdale was long ago.
Villages, there were 6 of them. Millrush, Mullinette, Wales, Dickinson's Landing, Ferns Point, and Altsville. We have 10 heritage buildings here at the Lost Villages Museum site. I spend a lot of time here. My wife calls this my first home rather than my second home. My name is Jim Brownell. I'm the president of the Lost Villages Historical Society. I've been around for quite a while. There are hundreds of stories that could be told about the relocation.
I was amazed at what you could keep from all this, and I suspect you were like those who kept all this for a long time. That story was sort of forgotten, and they wanted to not. But they made some effort to not talk too much about it.
Was a Osiris Erie 45, biggest iron drag line folks round here had ever seen.
A number of our Lost Villages people can go from one end of the village to the other and tell you who lived in each house, because it's burned in our mind.
One day Rosie said to Clay, when you're done the new Seaway, they're gonna flood my family's land.
I can't remember which shoes I put on this morning, but some of the memories are so indelible. I'm Alan Day, and I'm a voice from the lost village of Millrush. If you're going to swim out about 250 feet and go right to the bottom, which is about 24 feet down, you can see the foundation of the house I was born in. Picture almost any small rural village in eastern Ontario. We had 5 churches, we had a big arena, and we had the paper mill. It was quiet. If you wanted busy, you'd go down to the highway where the trucks were. It was very quiet.
Ferns Point, Dickinson's Landing, Iroquois, Altsville and Way.
It was very picturesque. There were a lot of tall trees along the number 2 highway. There were beautiful old houses, some United Empire Loyalist houses. My name is David Hill, and I grew up in the lost village of Mullinette. And we forget how great the Lonesome Rapids were. I remember going up as a child, and the first thing you could do was hear the roar. Then you could feel the spray on your face, And as you got closer, it was just tremendous.
I could still see the village. I could still feel the love in the village. You were treated with respect by everybody. My name is Noella Worrell. I was Noella St. Louis from the lost village of Millrush. Everybody cared about everybody. Somebody was sick. Oh, don't worry about cooking meals. You'd be fed. If there was a tragedy, people were there for support.
When there was something going on in the United Church, all the people came to it, and when there was something going on in the Anglican Church, people came to it. So it was a community hub, kind of. My name is Joan McEwen, and I represent voices of the people from the village of Wales. And we like to go out to the town of Wales and visit their places and take part in some of the events. Mostly, a lot of the events were connected to the church.
We roamed the village rather freely as kids. And because the railway tracks was right at the back of our property practically, we played around on the tracks, which wasn't wise, but we did it anyway. We would walk out to the wharf to go swimming.
When you got home, you had to flick your outside porch light on and off to tell them you're home. A community raised the people. If your parents weren't there watching you, somebody would be.
Miles of coastline in the center of a continent, a vast sea, different in only one respect from the other historic seven of the world. The Great Lakes were landlocked, cut off by nature from ocean shipping. On the map, there appeared to be a passageway for ships, a natural channel, the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence presented huge obstacles, rapids that even in our time seem insurpassable. But there were those who thought otherwise. A system of canals and locks, here just outside Montreal, at Lachine, at Soulange, and at the International Rapids section, and we could open up a whole mid-continent to ocean-going commerce. And I say it can be done.
And it is being done. Right now, the greatest concentration of heavy machinery ever assembled, over 3,000 pieces of equipment, are at work on one of the greatest projects in the history of mankind.
There was a huge project that started in '54. Engineers knew back in the early 1900s that you could make power from the Long Sault Rapids and that perhaps the Seaway could expand to take those ocean-going boats. There were some properties that had to be expropriated by law. They had to give up the properties.
I would say there was a lot of anxiety and people being upset. A lot of people like my father didn't believe that it was actually going to happen.
Some people may have been taken advantage of at the beginning of the project when the relocation, when all those deals had to be made. I can tell you that people stood up and knew what their rights were.
I went one time to a presentation being given, and the person giving the presentation was saying how everybody in the village was very delighted at the move because it meant now they were going to have running water and they were going to have sewers and everybody could see a wonderful future there. I jumped up out of my chair and said a few things maybe that I shouldn't have said, that not everybody liked it.
The relocation was a huge thing.
Come on, Dinah, get on the party line and pass the word. The hydroman is coming down the road. He's
They started moving houses. And I saw, as many young kids did at the time, these huge movers coming in, lifting a whole house. Brick houses too. Imagine that. There's a house in Long Sault. They lifted that house, that brick house, propped up the brick fireplace inside, and the veranda posts with the balcony, the base of those veranda posts were made of brick. They moved those posts, veranda posts, intact. I marveled at that. I thought, how could that be?
I would see big house movers going by, bulldozers, big trucks. It was fascinating. I was at a very formative age when the Seaway project was going through. It was a fascinating time.
And I can remember the vehicles. Oh man, they were something. Saw the house mover. The wheels in the house mover were humongous. One man was physically removed from his house because he was not moving. He did not care about any Seaway. Nobody was going to take his house from him, so they physically moved it.
So my dad's job was to look after the cemetery, and he had to identify the graves in the cemetery, and some of them were United Empire Loyalist graves. And then he had to contact the families of these people, ask the families if they wanted the graves moved to the new cemetery or wanted the graves covered over with cement. And that was a volunteer work. You can imagine the letters he had to write.
But these are so familiar to me. This huge house here, not the biggest house, and the largest house moved was a single-family home, was moved to Ingleside. But this was Alan Federley's house. And this was a tourist home. This is one of the cabins on that site. And he never looked back from making money at the time of the Seaway. His cabins were always full because not only did you have tourists coming, but you had all those hydro workers
looking for residents.
So there's a lot of history to be told in this collage. This collage, by the way, was assembled by, well, I assembled it, but I was able to do that because a fellow in Cornwall was tearing down a garage. And lo and behold, here in the garage was his photo album with these pictures. Well, he looked at the pictures and he thought, oh, these aren't Cornwall pictures. And so he thought, well, maybe they're from a lost village. So he came to my classroom. I was teaching at Long Sault Public and came to the classroom and I opened it, and sure enough, there was the house that my great uncle built. That house is near Long Sault. Anything that could float, anything that would obstruct the making of power at the power dam had to disappear. So everything had burnt. I saw the destruction. I saw fires burning. They were gentle little towns, pastoral, very picturesque. We saw all that destroyed. To lose those things made many people upset. And I'm going to tell this too, that many of the elderly people seemed to pass away shortly after this. And it was probably from their broken hearts.
For the many long-time residents of the area, people whose ancestors had pioneered the St. Lawrence Valley, July 1st, 1958 was a day they would not forget. The climax of years of planning and construction was at hand.
The inundation of '58 flooded 40,000 acres of land.
What happened with my dad, that's sort of a funny story, because he didn't really believe it was going to come all the way where they said it would. He had a bridge that went over Hoople Creek, and there were some good timbers in it that he wanted to save. So when the water started coming in, then he got the boys busy taking the bridge apart, and by the time they finished in the afternoon, the water was up to their necks. So that was quite an experience.
And I thought it was a great, sad image of Canada becoming a modern country, in the sense that all the traditions and the family ties and the villages. I mean, in Canada, most people have, you know, a village in their heart somewhere.
Right.
And now it's all flooded.
A place to go back to.
Yeah.
Yes. This was just donated to our historical society recently. A gentleman from quite some distance from here wanted to leave something in memory of his dad, and his dad was a photographer, so this is the photograph, which is an absolutely striking photo of a very sharp, of the Queen, a very sharp picture. Now, we have other photographs at our museum, but nothing with the quality of this one.
In 1959 is when the Queen came to open. I think she was about 15 then. Susan McLaren gave her a bouquet of flowers, and the people, all the people on the council were there. So we were all there for the whole performance. I just remember her, she was nicely dressed with a white hat and gloves.
The two really big communities that were created out of nothing, out of farmers' fields, were Long Sault and Ingleside.
Creating the head pond flooded out 3,200 hectares along the Canadian shoreline, displacing 6,500 residents of a number of small towns and villages. At Iroquois, it was decided to re-establish the entire village at a new site about 2.5 kilometers to the north. Only part of Morrisburg was affected, so a new subdivision was laid out to take care of the homes and businesses originally located along the natural shoreline. To absorb the smaller communities, 2 new towns were created. Located about 25 kilometers west of Cornwall, the town of Ingleside combined the former villages of Wales, Dickinson's Landing, Barron's Point, and Altsville. The new town of Long Sault absorbed the residents of Mille Roche and Moulinet.
6,500 people had to be relocated from those villages.
And at the time, because most people must have been a tragedy in a way, but were there people who thought that it was a great idea still? Apart from those who benefited from it, I mean the companies and those who built the dam and all that, but were there people who were saying, this is a good thing, now we need to move forward, it's a new era, all that? Were there
Well,
people who...
you know, at the time, they knew it was going to happen. They knew back in the first decade of the 1900s, whatever, the first decade, they knew that you could make power from the Long Sault Rapids. They knew that the ocean-going boats couldn't get up through the Seaway. So they knew all that. So it was inevitable in their minds.
And the new village was It's a lovely village now, but originally it was, there was a lot of mud, no trees. And we had a new school, new churches, but there was a lot of adjustment.
A lot of the farmers, which was hard for them, had to give up their farming and they moved into town and retired. But some of them didn't survive that long afterwards. I think it was too big a shock for them.
I was 15 and a half when I had to leave. All I could think of from the day I moved to Cornwall was how fast can I get out of here. When I was 16, the day I turned 16, I walked out of my bedroom with my suitcase. I'd only been living there 6 months. And my mother said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm getting out of here. I'm 16 now, you can't stop me." She said, "Oh yes, I can." I said, "No, you can't." And I had my little suitcase packed and I was leaving home because I hated it.
Grandfather never came back. Never once came back. Dad, after maybe 4 years after the lake was created, we would come up here, right in this little bay, and go fishing. That was hard on him the first few times, because that was the village we're fishing on. But it was really a long transition.
For my parents and grandparents, it was a stressful time, and many of them that suffered as a result didn't live that long after the move.
Some of them died within a year or two after being forced to move.
We are so much richer here at the Lost Villages Historical Society and Museum for having members like Rosemary Rutley and people like Joan McHugh and Alan Day, David Hill, Noella Worrell. But then it's also to be said and true that we get very excited when we have the younger generation showing an interest in becoming excited. And I can see that our past president of last year, 22 years old, when he became a life member of our historical society. Does that make the whole heart feel great? You bet it does.
So my name is Natalia Villeneuve. Hi, my name is Kelsey Gainda. I go to Trent University in Peterborough. So my favorite thing in the general store is actually this clock right above me. It was stopped on July 1st in 1958 at 8 a.m. when the last cofferdam was blown at the completion of the Seaway project. It's my favorite item because it was quite literally frozen in time and it marked the ending of the project. So in the store, this cash register is my favorite item. It was working up until August 2001, so that's pretty recent enough. It came from the Markle General Store from the Lost Village of Wales.
The water levels in the fall usually get quite low, and when they get low, many of the streets and sidewalks reappear, and you can walk where the village used to be situated. And so whenever that's the case, there's various things resurface. This is a collection of pieces that were discovered at Altsville by Jim's sister during a walk when the water levels were quite low. So we'd have different pieces of glass bottles. A common thing that I used to find there all the time as a kid, I used to go with my grandparents and we'd find pieces of china and silverware.
Really, it's the enthusiasm that you see in young people. My sister is certainly younger than myself, donating that, and then Gardner having that chance of telling stories about it and his connections. There's an example of his connections to our lost villages through his grandmother and great-grandmother. And, you know, that whole, he's the next cycle of the wheel. And when you think of life as big cycles, he's into the next cycle of the wheel. That hopefully will bring this story forward to the next generation, to his children and his grandchildren. Yeah.
When I first started diving, it was
we were looking for wrecks and stuff like that, which happened to be like 35 years ago. But now our passion is to see the historical on the bottom. People don't get to see very often anymore what was left there, okay? To see the old buildings, even though it's a foundation or just steps. You were running along an old seawall and you'll see some steps, okay? Or just this massive, massive tree stump that's been there for 60 years, 70 years on the bottom. It's quite an experience to get under there with the fish and see what was there almost 70 years ago. That's the last time people seen it.
It was so senseless. I cannot imagine this ever happening again. I don't think the people would allow it to displace that many people again.
We all know how many millions, billions of dollars of trade goes up and down the Seaway. So that overshadows we who lost our homes. It seems to be part of the let's get rich mentality of our kind. It doesn't matter what we disrupt on the planet as long as we can make a buck.
In keeping history alive. That's the main thing.
It's my connection to my past. I don't want anybody to forget the horrible things that were done to us then. And if the village wasn't there, it would be forgotten.
This is something that is ours. This is our heritage. And I think it's important that this be shared.